It's so good to see you after such a long time, and you've got short hair now.
Yes, I do. And white.
And white, yes. So I'm sorry there was a confusion of the day, but I'm very thankful that you managed to join us on such a short notice. So Alan, you will see that these are the girls from University of Sawabi. Hello. Hi. And I'll just give your introduction and then I'll switch to discussion to you. So Ms. Ellen Snortman will be talking about current challenges facing educated professional women in the United States in the current political and social climate. Ellen Snortman has her Juris Doctorate from Loyola Law School and is an author, lecturer, playwright, and filmmaker. She's also a writing and first-time author coach for local and internationally based clients. Dateline NBC featured Ellen's work as a self-defense advocate and instructor with her groundbreaking book, Beauty Bites Beast, now in its third edition. She's the co-author of The Safety Godmothers with Lisa Gatta and is finishing a new book, which is a memoir. Ms. Notland believes that think globally, act locally is vital for women and girls. Females of all species know how to protect themselves. It is a birthright for human females too. She says, there's nothing more local than one's own body. Her TEDx Pasadena talk, The Personal Safety Paradox, encapsulates decades of her self-defense advocacy in 18 minutes. A longtime women's rights advocate, Allen's column in the Pasadena Weekly has run for over 30 years. She was a blogger for the Huffington Post and Miss Magazine and has been featured on NPR and in major US newspapers. She's on the board of the National Women's History Alliance. Nordland's acclaimed one-woman show, Now That She's Gone, is a memoir about growing up Norwegian American in Colorado and South Dakota. Nordland has attended several United Nations World Conferences and annual UN meetings as an NGO delegate, self-defense advocate, and journalist. She's currently promoting the feature-length documentary film version of Beauty Bites Beast, which qualified for the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature at the 2017 Academy Awards. Well, this is such a rich introduction, Alan. So now, Alan, I will switch the discussion over to you, and you can start your discussion with the girls.
Hello, I'm so honored to have been asked to speak. And I think one of the most important things we can do as people is to reach across other people's cultures and countries, and for women to reach out to each other and share what it is like to be a woman wherever we are, because I say that we have more in common than we have differences. And I think that American women are less liberated than a lot of the world thinks we are. And that's not to say that we don't have certain freedoms um, that we have gained since the 1960s. But I look back at my own mother, for instance, and she never, ever spoke in public. She was the first woman in her family to get a college degree. And my mother was not allowed to have her own credit card or to borrow money without permission from my father. And that was in the 1970s that finally changed. And so that's very, very recent history. And I bring that up because I like to think of a metaphor of a table. And when you have a solid table that doesn't wobble, you have to have four legs to have the tabletop be stable, or at the very least, three legs. You can have a stable table with three legs, but there's more stability with the four legs. So if we use that as a metaphor, what are the legs that would have a person be in balance, kind of like a table, an adult person? Well, one factor would be to be financially capable. That would be able to make decisions on how money's spent. That would be a way to earn money. That would be a way to secure money. That would be a way to determine how money is spent within the family unit. And I don't promote independence per se as much as I promote interdependence. I happen to have a fabulous husband, and we are not dependent on each other as much as we are interdependent on one another. And we consider each other just as important to each other. There's not one person that's more important than the other. And we're kind of rare among American couples because, especially with the pandemic, a lot of women in our country lost their jobs and were all of a sudden, if they held a job outside the home, they were let go. And all of a sudden, many women in the United States found themselves in the position that their own mothers were in. And they didn't expect that in their lifetime. But what they have is called the second shift. And that's the title of a very popular book that says that women have, if they're working in regular employment, that they have a second shift when they get home, which is to take care of the household, to take care of the children, to take care of the husband. And so that's called the second shift. And so all of a sudden, the women who did keep their jobs, the taking care of the children, educating the children, because all of a sudden in our pandemic lockdown, kids could not go to school. So here's a mom at home and she's got 3 children that need to be educated. So she's holding a job, she's educating 3 kids, and at all different levels of school. And perhaps she hasn't been in school for a long, long, long time. So all of a sudden, she has a lot of responsibility that she didn't have before. And then if she happened to be lucky enough to have childcare, the nurseries, the childcare facilities, they were closed down. And so what we discovered is that liberation table, the leg of finances, was not that steady for a lot of women, if that makes sense. And I see Munaza is coming on. So the education piece is tied up a lot with education as well. So at least in the United States, the better jobs go to the women who have the most education. And that disappeared during the pandemic too, because it didn't matter how well educated you were. If they didn't need you on the job, then you're gone. So, but ordinarily in non-pandemic times, the better jobs and the higher paying jobs would go to the women who had the higher education. So, and then it's not that the men didn't care about the education of their children, they just didn't step up. This is all anecdotal, by the way, but they just didn't step forward to take care of the kids' education. So in a lot of the homes, all of a sudden they needed to have 4 or 5 or 6 computers, or to relegate computer time between, let's say, 5, 6 people. And that's a lot of domestic management, which fell to women too. So we've got a stressed out and very tired and very stretched to the maximum wife at home and mother, and all of a sudden she's playing all of these same and often thankless jobs. So there's that. And then I consider history to be another very important leg on that table. Um, for instance, if you knew that women were pilots at the beginning of the 19th, not the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, like in 1918, if you knew women had been doing that and were able to see that, then that wouldn't seem like such a wild dream to be able to do that. And that goes for any of the pursuits that women dream of, whether it's athletics, whether it's uh, well, different jobs that are ordinarily thought of as male dominated. And so if you know history, you know what's gone before, and you're able to use that as a stepping stone to dreams. And history is made up of the current news. The stories that show up in newspapers now become history. And if the stories of women don't make it into the newspapers, then they aren't available to historians and to researchers. So it's a kind of a vicious circle, because if women are not making the news or are not considered to be newsworthy, then we don't show up in history, even though the people that were contemporaries with us know about us. The future won't know about us because we didn't make it into the newspapers. So then that ties into women reporters. And I know when I covered the news for the UN conference in Beijing, for instance, Beijing, China held the 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women, and I was a United Nations credentialed journalist. And I was the only woman from Southern California and one of very few women journalists that were in Beijing to cover a women's conference. There are several levels of importance there, because news editors are primarily, in our country anyway, white, middle-aged men who decide what's important. And they decided a women's conference, an international women's conference, wasn't important, so they weren't going to spend resources to cover it. Now, they would spend lots of money on a football conference. An international football conference would be given a lot of resources, so that they'd spend a lot of money not only sending reporters, but sending cameras and sending video cameras and commentators and everything. But they decided that a women's conference wasn't that important, and so they didn't send any reporters from the big newspapers or from the big broadcast companies. So I went and I was able to talk to people who wouldn't be allowed to speak to male reporters. And so I was able to cover stories that wouldn't ordinarily get covered. Now, the big story in 1995 was Hillary Clinton going to the conference, and where she gave her famous speech that women's rights are human rights. And that was a big, big, big deal in the United States, because a lot of people had not thought of women's rights as human rights, which, you have to go, well, women are humans, right? Why is that such a big leap? But for a lot of reasons, the mindsets that a lot of, especially news people had, was that, ooh, women's rights are human rights. And that was a big deal. And so, at least in the United States, a lot of money is spent on men's pursuits and sports and things that are of interest to men. And given that we're 50% of the population, it doesn't make sense because women are the primary consumers, are the people who decide where the money goes when we buy groceries, when we buy products and all that stuff. And we're also the big ticket buyers for plays and for movies. But the business people behind movies and plays and television have not really caught on to that, which is amazing because the movies in the United States that have been led by women have done very, very well. And they're big successes. And if they looked at the track record of so-called women's stories, you have to ask yourself, well, why is a woman's story less universal than a men's story? But men's stories are considered to be universal and of universal interest, and women's stories are put into a narrow, like, special interest group, which I find odd because I think women are just as interesting as men are, and women's lives are just as interesting. And then we go into my niche, which is teaching women about boundaries. And the most dramatic part of that is teaching women that they have the right, if somebody attacks them, to defend themselves. And that's controversial in the United States. And I'm about making it less controversial around the world. And one of the things that I ask people is that, do you consider a lion mother to be unladylike because she protects her cubs? No, that's absurd. And even a woman who protects her children would not be considered to be unladylike. That would be within her job as a mother to protect her children. But then if she gets attacked by a man, then all of a sudden everything that she would use to protect her children kind of goes out the window. And so I've spent the last 30 years of my life doing what I could do to break up that mindset. The mindset we're discovering is one of the most important parts of education. If you believe that it is not possible to swim, for instance, or if you believe that it's not possible to learn another language, then you're not even going to try. But if you see somebody in your category of person, whether that's a young person or a low-income person, learning how to speak another language, and you see somebody doing it, well, then you go, well, then if they can do it, I can do that. And that's one of the most beautiful things about the human spirit, is that we see somebody do something and we go, oh, it is possible. Look, if they can do it, I can do it. And I think that's so inspiring. So one of the things that I do too is I teach women how to say no, which is no, thank you. I do not want to do that. And I'm shy about saying no to some people, and realize that I've got to, if I'm in a situation that's uncomfortable for me and I'm like, oh, I can't say no to that person, what I have to do is I have to ask my husband if he'll rehearse with me, or my best friend or something, and I'll say, look, I've got to say no to this person. Can I practice with you? And what we've discovered with mindset is that if you stay quiet or stay private about something that scares you, and you open your mouth and share it with somebody you feel safe with, then it's not so scary, because by yourself in your own head, it just seems really, really scary. So if I need to say, no, thank you, I am not available and I wish you luck. That's not hard to say. We all have the capability of saying that, but we're afraid of letting the person down or disappointing them or doing any number of things that would be offensive maybe. But just learning how to say, no, thank you, I'm not available, and I wish you luck. If you practice saying that, then when you're actually in the situation, then all of a sudden it's a lot easier to say if you practiced it. And one of the things we've noticed, and we're starting to get scientific studies on this, is that when you learn how to protect yourself physically, and like no kidding, that translates into your ability to protect yourself verbally. Because what happens is that when you're scared, all of a sudden you freeze. And that freezes your intellectual abilities too. How many of you, raise your hand if this is true for you. How many of you have been in a situation with a friend or a sibling or somebody, and you just go, why didn't I say blah, 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 but after the fact? Can you relate to that? Absolutely. That is one of the most human things there is. And the reason why you couldn't say something at the time is that something happened that made your adrenaline go up. And adrenaline is a fight, flight, or freeze chemical reaction that happens in your body. You can't help it. And that is not the time to figure out what to say. It will freeze your ability to be articulate. And that's why it's a great idea to practice something verbally with somebody you trust and somebody you feel safe with before you're actually in that situation. So you'll work out what that feels like to actually say the words, so you don't have to come up with the words when you're in a situation that has you feel nervous. And nerves will also produce cortisone or adrenaline rush in your body. And one of the things that we've noticed is that in the literature and all sorts of things, we don't see very many women, although there are some that seem to be strong or seem to be able to think on their feet. And the more we see that, the more we learn, because that's another inspiring thing about people. When we see, even when we see people on a TV show or in a movie do something, then it's ours. Our minds are so incredible. We're storytelling creatures. And when we see a story that has somebody that we can relate to in it, we can learn what it is that they have. There's something also inspiring about ideas being contagious. Let's say, for instance, I'll use my ancestors' home country, Norway. And it was not easy to get from one village to another because of the fjords and the deep, deep valleys. And so you could be isolated for years without visiting the people that are literally, as the bird flies, only maybe 4 or 5 miles away from you. But you'd have to be very clever in mountain climbing and doing all these things to get to these other areas. Well, let's say that a woman in one valley discovers that she can make a wheelbarrow. So she basically invents a wheel. And somebody comes and visits from the valley next valley over and sees it, and it's like, oh, that's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? And then it goes back to their village or back to wherever they live, where prior to that visit they hadn't seen a wheel before. But then with this visit to this other valley, they see a wheel, and then that's the contagious thing about ideas. And that's why it's so important for our storytellers to include people like us. And so the table of liberation has to do with history, has to do with finances, and then has to do with taking care of your own well-being and your own body, being the person who decides what's good for you and what's not good for you. So I will stop talking and see if you have any questions that I can field.
This is Hera from Management Sciences. First of all, I would say that you are a very pretty lady, and I just like your personality. So, ma'am, my question is, what is the man factor that you have learned all over your journey? Because we have heard about your introduction, and that's very much rich. Thank you.
The most important thing that I have learned is that human being, what?
From the day you started and where you are today, what is the man factor that you have learned that every girl should adopt from you?
Well, the most important thing is to be curious and to ask questions and learn everything you possibly can from each person you meet, because we are all precious and walking libraries of experience and knowledge. And Manaza is a perfect example of that. She is walking and meeting and listening and asking and listening. So curiosity is the main commonality with all the people I know that I admire the most. And and for every girl and woman to know that they're not alone, and that they have sisters who are rooting for them and sisters who want them to be everything they want to be, whether that's in a traditional role or whether that is being an astronaut and everything in between. My late niece once said to me, Aunt Ellen, I don't want to have a career outside the home. I want to be the best mother I can possibly be, and I know you're against that. And I said, I'm not against that. I've gotten my education and everything that I've gotten so that you can have that and be honored for it and be respected for it. And I also don't want being a housewife and being a mother to be looked down on or be thought of as less. So we cleared that misunderstanding up. And I'm so glad she told me, because she was curious about what my position was about traditional female roles. And just because I didn't follow that path doesn't mean I don't want that path to be followed by anybody. So I'm always curious. So curiosity, I think, is the most important thing. And that's the basis of education too, is to read everything you can get your hands on and, ask people. Like this young woman asked me, what do I think is the most important thing? And curiosity. That's what led me to write my book. I was curious, because what happened is that I was confronted by a man who had broken into our home, and my husband went in to take care of whatever was happening inside the house, and then I followed in, and a man met me at the doorway with a knife and held it up and was ready to plunge it into me. And I screamed so loudly, the man dropped the knife, grabbed his ears, and ran like crazy. And I was wondering why nobody had ever prepared me for the possibility of somebody getting violent with me. And so that curiosity led me to write a book, because that my book Beauty Bites Beast is the answer to that question. How come nobody ever talked to me about what happens if somebody tries to get violent with me? And violence starts on the playground with bullies, and bullies is a childhood level of violence. But curiosity was the driving factor.
And I want to ask you that what's your thoughts on feminism, like based on your life experience?
Okay, well, in the United States, feminism was libeled and made fun of and ridiculed, and when in fact it's a simple philosophy which says that the value of men and women are equal. Not that men and women are the same, but their value is equal. And then it got manipulated and twisted and made fun of and ridiculed, and so that a lot of really great people said, well, I'm not a feminist, but, and then followed it with, I believe women should have full education, I believe women should have full opportunities, all the kind of stuff that they valued, but they were so embarrassed by the label feminist that they denied it. But that was because it got ridiculed in the mainstream press. And I'm very proud to be a feminist, because I love men, I love women. My brothers are my brothers, and my sisters are my sisters. And
Good. So yes, we were talking about your thoughts on feminism. So would you please repeat that, because we lost the connection?
my views on feminism.
Yes. How would you define feminism for these girls? Because in this part of the world, we have lots of skepticism about what actually feminism is. And so how would you define feminism and what it is like in America?
Well, it's controversial in America, because my view is that it's controversial because the people who control the newspapers and the broadcast media ridiculed it and made fun of it, and because they were threatened by it. So one of the fastest ways to undermine ideas is to ridicule it, and that's usually because whomever is ridiculing it feels their position or their power is somehow threatened. And that's I've always been proud to be a feminist because my parents were. Both my mom and my dad were, and they believed in the equal dignity and respect of men and women. Not saying that men had to be like women or women had to be like men or anything like that. That's all embellishment and not actually true of what feminism means. But it's hard to have a conversation if the label has so much emotion and meaning attached to it that's negative, that led a lot of women to say, well, I'm not a feminist, but, and then they proceed to give you values that are feminist values, mostly because they're just embarrassed about the label. Make sense?
Hello, ma'am. Hi. I'm Mehrina from MFB department. It's nice to meet you, ma'am. You are an example lady for us. My question is like, which person motivate you for a life like which is now example for one like us? I want just know that in simple words, if you explain that how can we motivate a simple lady, not like advanced lady. Locally, there, if we want to motivate village lady, how can we motivate her for an example life? Just simply explain that for us. Thank you, ma'am.
And I think she wanted to ask that it's easy for informed women or educated women when we talk these things in front of them, so they can be convinced or motivated for these things. But what about a simple woman, a village lady? How can we motivate her for her rights to know these things? So it's very difficult to talk to them, to convince them about the women rights. So she wants to know that how can we convince those women who are not educated or who do not have an exposure?
Well, that's an excellent question, and one I ask myself all the time. First of all, I think convincing somebody when there are unspoken fears about it is very difficult. So that would bring me to be curious about that person and ask them, what is there something you're afraid of happening if you discuss women's rights, or what are you afraid of? And then that gets very human very quickly. Well, I'm afraid my husband will hurt me if I talk about women's rights, or I'm afraid that I will have my daughter in trouble if I talk about women's rights. It takes a lot of courage to be a pioneer in anything that challenges the status quo. It's not easy. And it helps if you have an understanding and compassion for the situation that people are in. Does that make sense? Anything else?
It's just one question from my side. The title that you chose was Beauty Bites Beast. So how would you comment on that if somebody comes up, because we are students of literature and we always talk about discourses and the titles, so we analyze that and we see that critically. Do you think when you chose the title Beauty Bites Beast, the women have been reduced to an object that is only related to beauty, and men are taken as beasts? So how would you comment on that? Why would you call women a beauty and man a beast?
Well, a title is meant to grab somebody's attention. So I don't think men are beasts, and I don't think all women are beauties. I do think that we all, men and women, have a little bit of both in us. For instance, if somebody were threatening a child, I would turn into a beast real fast. Do you know what I mean? I would bring out the beast in me so as to protect that child. And there are many men that have beautiful souls. So I use that because there's I don't know if you have this expression, but it's an old saying in journalism. Dog bites man. That's not a story. That's very typical. But man bites dog, that's a story because it's not typical. And then I started wondering, well, are there situations where women have defended themselves against very violent men? And I found out there were, but they never made it to the pages of the newspapers. So I called those Beauty Bites Beast. And as it's stereotypical in many ways, but it did grab attention because that's a title you don't expect to see. And I want to put this very specifically. Just having discussions like this, I never had these kinds of discussions when I was in college or when I was studying. Just women getting together and talking about how they think and how they feel and what are their philosophies about defending themselves. We have deep thoughts, but we don't necessarily know what they are until we start to talk about them, right? So I think beauty is very important. And I think that beauty without substance is fleeting. So when we're told as women that our only value is beauty, then that is that's not a very strong foundation. And when men are told they're only valued for their ability to be violent, that makes for an unbalanced human being too. So what I'm trying to do is to have people embrace and respect all the different aspects of being a human being.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I think we don't have any more questions. So I
Okay.
thank you from the bottom of my heart actually for taking
Can
time
I,
from your busy.
Sonia,
Yeah. Okay, ma'am,
Sonia?
Liz is here. Yeah.
Alan, could you share a few clips of Beauty Bites Beast? Maybe not be today. If you could send us, we can show these girls tomorrow.
Oh,
during the
absolutely.
session.
Absolutely.
Would it-
Yeah, absolutely.
So we would be happy if you share the complete film. If not the complete film, then maybe few clips, some parts of it.
Okay. Let's see. It's almost midnight here now. So if we send it during the day tomorrow, we can do that?
Yeah, because we have sessions with them tomorrow after
Okay.
11, so we can show them.
Okay. Okay, great. I'd be honored.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much on a very short notice. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Allen, because your presence and voice was actually helped magnify our cause in the best possible way. So, and thank you for your encouraging words. And I think they are very inspiring, and we'll be inspired in so many people. We're going to.
Thank you. Bye.
So we'll be just signing off once again. Thank you very much. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.